The neon signs of Centauri Trading Hub cast their garish glow across James Harrison's weather-beaten cargo ship. Steam hissed from maintenance vents, mixing with the perpetual artificial rain that kept the station's atmosphere processors running. James stood in the shadow of his ship's landing struts, watching the crowd flow past his docking bay like a river of mixed species and destinies. 17 years of running cargo through the outer rim had taught him to spot trouble before it spotted him. That's why the cloaked figure moving against the crowd's current caught his attention immediately. Too deliberate in their movements, too focused in their direction, heading straight for him. The figure stopped at the edge of his docking bay, hesitating just long enough for James to notice the slight shimmer of scaled skin beneath the hood. Lyran, one of the aquatic species from the nebula regions. The cloak fell back slightly, revealing iridescent features that seemed to capture and reflect the neon lights above. "Are you the pilot of this vessel?" The voice was melodic but strained, carrying notes of both pride and desperation. James crossed his arms, keeping his posture relaxed but ready. "Depends who's asking." The figure lowered her hood completely, revealing delicate gill-like structures along her neck that pulsed with a soft bioluminescence. "I am Vayana, daughter of the third house of Lyra. I seek passage to the Andromeda Edge." James let out a low whistle. The Edge was notorious for pirate activity and worse, corporate claim jumpers who'd shoot first and check permits later. That's a long way through unfriendly space. Credits up front, no negotiations. Vayana's luminescent patterns flickered in what James recognized as distress. "I have no credits," she admitted, her chin lifting slightly. "But I offer something of equal value." "Not interested in contraband," James said firmly, turning away. He'd learned the hard way that smuggling brought more trouble than profit. "I offer myself as collateral." James froze mid-step, then turned back slowly. "Come again?" "My people are dying," Vayana said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "A plague sweeps through our colony. The medicine we need lies in a research station near the Edge, but no corporate ships will risk the journey without full payment." Her gill structures pulsed faster now, betraying her anxiety. "I am trained in xenobiology and advanced navigation. I offer my services, my knowledge, and if necessary, myself as guarantee of payment." James studied her carefully. Every instinct honed from years of survival in the frontier told him to walk away. But something in her bearing, the careful way she held herself despite her desperation, spoke of truth. "Your people," he said slowly, "how many?" 3,000 colonists. 400 already lost to the plague." Her voice caught slightly. "Among them, my younger sister." James ran a hand through his graying hair, cursing silently at himself for what he was about to do. "Show me proof. Of the colony, the plague, everything." Vayana reached into her cloak and withdrew a small holographic projector. Images sprang to life between them, a small settlement nestled in the rings of a gas giant, medical readings, and faces twisted in pain. The data was real. James had dealt with enough forged documents to spot the difference. "I don't deal in sapient collateral," he said finally. "But I'll take your skills as partial payment. You work as crew, not cargo. We split any profits from future jobs during the journey. And when this is done, you owe me nothing more. Clear?" The relief that washed across Vayana's features was almost painful to watch. Her bioluminescence brightened noticeably. "You have my word, Captain." "James Harrison," he supplied, already knowing he might regret this decision. "And it's just James." "No, Captain." He gestured toward his ship, the Star Weaver. "She's not much to look at, but she's gotten me out of tighter spots than this." As they walked up the boarding ramp, James couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into something far bigger than a simple transport job. The way Vayana's eyes darted across the docking bay, the careful precision of her movements, she was running from something more than just debt. "One condition," he said as the airlock cycled. Complete honesty from here on. I need to know what I'm really flying into. Vayana met his gaze, her alien eyes reflecting the ship's internal lights like captured stars. Then you should know the plague is not natural. Someone engineered it specifically for my people. The journey to the edge is not just for medicine, it's to find the truth. James felt the familiar hum of the Starweaver's engines warming up, a sound that had always meant the promise of profit and adventure. This time, it felt like the countdown to something more. Well, he said, settling into the pilot's seat, looks like we've got a lot to talk about during the journey. He began the launch sequence, watching as Vayana took the co-pilot's position with natural grace. Starting with who wants your people dead badly enough to engineer a plague. The docking clamps released with a heavy thunk, and the Starweaver lifted into the artificial night of Centauri hub. As they cleared the atmospheric barrier, James caught Vayana's reflection in the viewport, her expression a mixture of hope and fear that made him wonder just what he'd gotten himself into. But as the stars opened up before them and the ship's jump drive began to cycle, he realized it didn't matter. Sometimes the right choice and the smart choice weren't the same thing. And for better or worse, he'd made his. The Starweaver leaped into hyperspace, carrying its crew toward whatever destiny awaited them at the edge of known space. 3 days into their journey, James found himself growing accustomed to the gentle glow that filled the bridge whenever Vayana was deep in concentration. Her bioluminescent patterns had become a kind of atmospheric barometer, shifting with her moods as she worked at the navigation console, plotting courses through increasingly dangerous sectors. Corporate patrol vessel detected, she announced, her scales dimming to a muted blue. Neptune Industries markings. They're running active scanners. James's hands moved across the controls with practiced ease. Legitimate cargo runners don't come out this far. He adjusted their trajectory slightly, using a nearby asteroid field to mask their heat signature. They're looking for something. Or someone. Vayana's fingers danced across her console, bringing up detailed scan results. Their search pattern suggests they're tracking specific quantum signatures. She paused, her luminescence flickering. Signatures like those produced by Lyran Biotechnology. You mean like whatever you're carrying in that hidden compartment in your quarters? James kept his voice neutral, but he saw Vayana stiffen in his peripheral vision. Yeah, I know about that. Ship sensors picked it up during the first night cycle. The silence that followed was broken only by the constant hum of the ship's engines. Finally, Vayana spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. It's a sample of the plague. The pure strain, before it was released into my colony's water supply. Her patterns pulsed with a mix of shame and determination. I needed to prove who's responsible. James nodded slowly, keeping his eyes on the patrol ship's movement. Neptune Industries. They're behind the plague? Their subsidiary, Frontier Pharmaceuticals. They approached our colony 6 months ago, offering to upgrade our water purification systems. 3 weeks later, the first cases appeared. Vayana's voice hardened. They're testing it on us, developing a bioweapon that targets specific genetic markers. My people are their lab rats. The patrol ship sensors swept past their position, and James held his breath. After a tense moment, the corporate vessel began to turn away. They're not just going to let you expose them, he said quietly. No, Vayana agreed. That's why I needed someone who could operate outside corporate-controlled space. Someone who... She hesitated, someone who still believes in doing what's right, even when it's not profitable. James felt a smile tug at his lips despite the gravity of the situation. You took quite a risk, making that judgment about me based on a few minutes' conversation at the trading hub. I observed you for 3 days before approaching, Vayana admitted. I saw you help that Martian family whose ship had been impounded, saw you refuse that smuggling contract from the Orion Syndicate. Her patterns shifted to a warmer hue. You hide your conscience well, James Harrison, but it's there. Before James could respond, proximity alarms blared through the bridge. The corporate patrol ship had suddenly reversed course, accelerating toward their position. "They're charging weapons." Viana's hands flew across her console. They must have detected the plague sample signature. James's training took over as he yanked the Starweaver into a steep dive, using the asteroid field's gravity wells to slingshot them away from the pursuit. "Can you mask the sample's signature?" "Yes, but I need to reach it physically." Viana was already rising from her seat. "The containment unit requires direct biometric input." "Go." James ordered, executing a series of evasive maneuvers as energy beams sliced through the space they'd occupied seconds before. "I'll keep them busy." As Viana raced from the bridge, James found himself wondering if this was how his father had felt during the corporate wars, fighting against forces that saw people as nothing more than entries on a profit-loss statement. The thought brought both clarity and determination. The next few minutes were a dance of thrust and counter-thrust, with James using every trick he'd learned in 17 years of frontier flying. The corporate ship had better weapons, but the Starweaver was smaller, more agile, and had a pilot with nothing left to lose. When Viana returned, her face flushed and her patterns swirling with exertion, James had managed to put several large asteroids between them and their pursuers. "Signature is masked," she reported, sliding back into her seat. "But they have our general vector now. They'll know where we're headed." James studied the navigation display, mind racing through options. "Then we'll take the long way around." He pointed to a string of abandoned mining stations that formed a rough arc through the sector. "We can use the old maintenance tunnels to skip between stations. It'll add 3 days to our journey, but my people don't have 3 extra days." Viana's patterns flashed with distress. James reached across the space between their seats, hesitating only briefly before placing his hand over hers. Her scales were smooth and cool beneath his fingers. "Trust me," he said softly. "I promise to help you save your people, and I will. But I can't do that if we get blown out of space by corporate gunships." Viana's luminescence stabilized gradually, and she turned her hand to grip his. "I do trust you," she said, and James could hear the weight of that admission in her voice. "That's what frightens me. I haven't trusted anyone since my sister died." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken understanding. Then a proximity alert chirped, reminding them of their situation, and they quickly separated, returning to their duties. As James plotted their course through the mining station network, he found himself hyper-aware of Viana's presence beside him. He'd worked with alien species before, but this felt different. There was a connection forming here, born of shared danger and mutual respect, that both excited and terrified him. "Tell me about your sister," he said as they approached the first mining station. "If you want to, I mean." Viana was quiet for so long that James thought she wouldn't answer. But as the Starweaver slipped into the ancient maintenance tunnel, her patterns shifted to a deep, morning purple, and she began to speak. Gas giants' rings stretched across the viewport like a river of diamonds, their crystalline fragments catching the light of the system's distant sun. But James's attention was fixed on the structure nestled within the debris field, a massive habitat cylinder, its surface dotted with biodomes and atmospheric processors. "Home," Viana whispered, her patterns flickering with a complex mix of emotions. "Or what's left of it." As they drew closer, James could see signs of the colony's deterioration. Several biodomes were dark, their surfaces clouded over. Movement was visible in only about half of the habitation sections, and even the main reactor seemed to be running at reduced power. "Your people built all this?" he asked, genuinely impressed despite the structure's obvious decline. Viana nodded, her fingers moving across the communications panel. "We came here seeking sanctuary after the corporate expansion displaced us from our original world. This place was supposed to be our fresh start." Her voice hardened. "Until Neptune Industries found us." A response crackled through the ship's speakers, a burst of musical tones that James's universal translator rendered into words: unidentified vessel, maintain distance or face defensive action. Vayana responded in her native language, her own voice taking on melodic qualities that made James's skin tingle. After a tense moment, the colony's defense grid powered down, and a docking vector appeared on their navigation display. "They're not happy about the human presence," she explained, glancing at James apologetically. "Our experiences with your species have been mixed." James guided the Star Weaver along the designated approach vector. "Can't blame them, given what some of our corporations have done. But they'll have to trust me if we're going to help them." The docking procedure was complicated by the swirling debris of the ring system, but James managed it smoothly. As the airlock cycled, Vayana turned to face him fully. "James," she said, her patterns pulsing with urgency, "what you're about to see, it won't be pleasant. The plague affects our neural pathways first, then our bioluminescence. In the final stages." She trailed off, unable to continue. He reached out and squeezed her shoulder gently. "I'm not going anywhere." The colony's reception committee consisted of 3 Lyrans, their patterns notably dimmer than Vayana's. The eldest, whose scales had faded to a pale gray, stepped forward. "Daughter of the 3rd house," he said in heavily accented standard, "you return to us in strange company." "Elder Nixus," Vayana bowed slightly. "This is James Harrison. He risked his life to bring me home, and to bring this." She produced the containment unit holding the plague sample. "Evidence of Neptune Industries' crimes against our people." The elder's patterns flickered with interest, but his expression remained guarded. "Come. There is much to show you both." As they walked through the colony's corridors, James began to understand Vayana's warning. Every few meters they passed Lyrans in various stages of the plague's progression. Some barely glowed at all, their patterns reduced to faint pulses. Others moved with jerky, unnatural motions that spoke of nervous system damage. In the main medical center, the full scale of the crisis became apparent. Rows of beds filled the large chamber, each occupied by a Lyran in the advanced stages of the disease. The air was filled with a discordant symphony of pain and distress, their bioluminescent patterns flickering weakly like dying stars. 400 dead, Elder Nixus said quietly. Another 1,000 showing symptoms. Our medical technology cannot combat it. The plague adapts too quickly. Vayana's patterns had dimmed considerably as she took in the scene. The sample I brought, it's the original strain. With it, we can prove Neptune Industries engineered it specifically to target our genetic sequence. Proof means nothing without the power to act on it, another elder interjected bitterly. The corporations control everything beyond our rings. Who would help us? James, who had been studying the medical readouts on a nearby console, spoke up. The Independent Worlds Alliance. All eyes turned to him. They've been looking for a way to check corporate expansion in this sector. Evidence of biological warfare against a peaceful colony? That would give them the leverage they need. The Alliance is 3 weeks away at best, Elder Nixus countered. Many more will die before help arrives. Unless, Vayana said slowly, her patterns beginning to brighten with realization, we can get to the research station at the edge. The cure must exist there, they wouldn't risk developing a weapon like this without a countermeasure. James nodded. The Starweaver can make it in 4 days if we push her engines to the limit. We get the cure, transmit the evidence to the Alliance, and... He was interrupted by alarms blaring throughout the colony. A young Lyran burst into the medical center, his patterns flashing with panic. "Corporate ships," he gasped. "A full battle group. They've found us." Elder Nixus's patterns pulsed with grim resignation. "They mean to eliminate all evidence of their crime. Including us." James looked at Vayana, saw the same determination in her eyes that he felt in his heart. Not if we can help it, he said, already calculating possibilities. But we'll need to move fast, and I'll need help from your engineers. What are you planning? Vayanna asked, her patterns swirling with a mix of hope and anxiety. James allowed himself a grim smile. Something incredibly stupid and possibly brilliant. But first, he turned to Elder Nixus. I need to know everything about this ring system's composition. Every debris field, every magnetic anomaly, every piece of abandoned mining equipment. Because we're about to turn this entire region into a battlefield. As the colony mobilized around them, James caught Vayanna studying him with an unreadable expression. What? You could leave, she said softly. Take your ship and run. No one would blame you. James shook his head. Actually, they would. I would. He met her gaze steadily. Besides, I made you a promise. And out here on the edge, sometimes a promise is all we have left. Her patterns shifted to a color he hadn't seen before, something between hope and affection. But before either of them could speak further, the first impacts of corporate weapons fire shook the colony, and the time for words was over. The battle for the Lyran colony was about to begin, and James Harrison was suddenly very grateful for every dirty trick and desperate maneuver he'd learned in 17 years of survival on the frontier. They were going to need them all. Port thrusters at maximum. James's voice cut through the chaos of the Starweaver's bridge as another explosion illuminated the viewport. Vayanna, what's the status of those mining charges? Her patterns pulsing with concentration, Vayanna's fingers danced across the control panel. Charges are set throughout the debris field. Awaiting your signal. A blast rocked the ship, causing her patterns to flare briefly. Though preferably before they blow us out of space. The corporate battle group had split into 3 wings, their sleek warships moving to surround the colony. But James had spent the last hour using the Starweaver's superior maneuverability to lay a trap, scattering modified mining charges throughout the ring system's debris field. Elder Nixus, James called into the comm, is the colony's shield reinforcement ready? Modified shield generators are online, the Elder's voice crackled back. But they won't hold long against sustained bombardment. James allowed himself a grim smile. They won't have to. He switched channels. All Lyran defense craft, form up behind the Starweaver. Remember the plan, when I give the signal, fly straight for the gap in their formation. Don't stop for anything. The small fleet of Lyran vessels, mostly retrofitted mining ships and atmospheric shuttles, moved into position. James could feel Vayanna's eyes on him, her patterns shifting between hope and fear. You're sure about this? She asked softly. Nope, James replied, his hands tight on the controls. But sometimes the best plans are the ones your enemy would never expect because they're too crazy to consider. A warning light flashed on his console, the corporate ships were charging their main weapons. It was now or never. All ships, full power to forward shields. James shouted. Vayanna, detonate the charges, now. Her hand slammed down on the control panel. Throughout the debris field, the modified mining charges exploded in sequence. But instead of simple detonations, they triggered a cascade effect in the ring system's crystalline structure. Massive chunks of debris began to shift and fracture, creating a wave of destruction that rolled toward the corporate fleet. Break formation. The corporate commander's panicked voice cut across all frequencies as his ship scattered to avoid the debris wave. Just as James had planned, their carefully coordinated attack dissolved into chaos. All ships, follow me. James threw the Starweaver into a spiral dive, leading the ragtag Lyran fleet through the gap that had opened in the corporate formation. Behind them, the wave of debris slammed into several corporate vessels, overwhelming their shields. But they weren't safe yet. The corporate commander quickly regrouped his remaining ships, and energy beams began slicing through space around them. Secondary charges ready, Vayanna reported, her patterns now pulsing with battle rhythm. "Wait for it," James muttered, watching as their pursuers closed the distance. "Wait for it." The corporate ships were almost within range of their heavy weapons. Now! The second wave of charges detonated, this time in the dense particle clouds that had gathered at the edge of the ring system. The resulting electromagnetic pulse swept across space, temporarily disabling the pursuing ship's targeting systems. "All craft, emergency jump sequence," James ordered, punching in the coordinates they'd prepared. "Scatter and regroup at the designated point." One by one, the Lyran ships vanished into hyperspace. The Starweaver was last, holding position to ensure the others escaped safely. As James reached for the jump controls, a lucky shot from one of the recovering corporate ships struck their stern. Alarms blared throughout the bridge as systems began to fail. "Jump drive is damaged," Vayana reported, her patterns flickering with urgency. "We have maybe one jump left before it fails completely." James quickly calculated their options. They were too far from the colony to return, and the nearest safe port was out of reach. That left only one choice. "Plot a course for the edge," he ordered. "Straight to the research station." Vayana's patterns pulsed with surprise. "The jump drive might not make it that far." "Then we'd better hope it does." James met her gaze. "Because right now, that station is our only chance of getting the cure back to your people." Another impact rocked the ship. "Corporate vessels regaining weapons control," Vayana warned. "Jump now," James commanded. The Starweaver's engines screamed in protest as they tore a hole in spacetime. Through the viewport, James watched the stars stretch into lines of light, praying the damaged drive would hold together long enough to get them to safety. As the ship shuddered around them, he felt Vayana's hand find his. Her touch was cool and reassuring, her patterns glowing with a mix of gratitude and concern. "That was either brilliant or insane," she said softly. "In my experience, the best plans are usually both." James tried to smile, but another violent shudder from the ship turned it into a grimace. "Though right now, I'm leaning toward insane." The jump drive's whine reached a fever pitch, and warning lights began flashing across every console. They were pushing the damaged system far beyond its safety limits, but they had no choice. The lives of thousands depended on them reaching that research station. "James," Vayana's voice was barely audible above the ship's protests, "if we don't make it." "We'll make it," he interrupted firmly, squeezing her hand. "I promised to help save your people, remember? And I've got a perfect record of keeping my promises." He paused, then added more softly, "Well, mostly perfect." Her patterns shifted to that same color he'd seen before, the one that made his heart race a little faster. "When this is over," she began, but another violent shudder cut her off. "Jump drive critical." The computer's warning echoed through the bridge. "Failure imminent." James held Vayana's gaze for a moment longer, seeing in her alien eyes everything they hadn't had time to say. Then he turned back to his controls, determination setting his jaw. "Come on, old girl," he muttered to his ship. "One last push. Get us there." The Starweaver screamed through hyperspace, trailing particles of light like a wounded phoenix, carrying its crew toward either salvation or destruction. And in the back of James's mind, a quiet voice wondered if perhaps he'd finally found something worth dying for. The Starweaver burst from hyperspace in a shower of sparks and venting plasma, its jump drive finally giving out. Through the viewport, the Neptune Industries research station loomed against the backdrop of swirling nebula gases, a massive structure of gleaming metal and reinforced glass, illuminated by the ethereal light of distant stars. "Jump drive completely burned out," Vayana reported, her patterns fluctuating with the effort of managing multiple failing systems. "Main power at 40%. Life support stable, but shield generators are barely functional." James nodded grimly, his hands dancing across the controls as he guided their wounded ship toward the station. "Any sign they've detected us?" "Nothing yet. The radiation from the nebula is masking our approach." She paused, her patterns dimming slightly. "James, thank you. For everything. Whatever happens next." "Save it," he interrupted gently. "We're not done yet." His expression softened as he glanced at her. "Besides, I think I'm the one who should be thankful. You've given me something I haven't had in a long time." "What's that?" "A purpose worth fighting for." Before Vayana could respond, proximity alarms blared to life. Multiple security drones deploying from the station, she reported, professional focus returning to her voice. Automated defense systems activating. James allowed himself a grim smile. "Good thing we came prepared." He opened a secure channel to the device they'd brought from the colony. "Elder Nixus? Are you receiving?" "We are here." The Elder's voice crackled through the comm. "The colony's best computer specialists are ready. When you breach their outer defenses, we will strike at their systems." The security drones approached in attack formation, their weapons charging. James took a deep breath, then threw the Starweaver into a series of evasive maneuvers that strained the ship's damaged systems to their limits. "Vayana, activate the electromagnetic pulse generator." Her patterns flaring with concentration, Vayana triggered the device they jury-rigged from salvaged mining equipment. A wave of energy burst from the Starweaver, catching the first wave of drones and sending them spinning powerless through space. "Outer defense grid penetrated," she announced. "Colonial hackers are in their network, they're fighting back, but the virus is spreading." James guided the Starweaver toward one of the station's emergency docking ports, dodging fire from the remaining security systems. "How long until they realize we're here?" As if in answer, a new voice cut across their comm system. "This is a restricted Neptune Industries facility. You have 10 seconds to withdraw before lethal force is authorized." "Noticed us, did they?" James muttered, then keyed the comm. "This is James Harrison of the independent vessel Starweaver. We know what you've done to the Lyran colony. We have proof of your bioweapon program." There was a pause, then, "You have no idea what you're interfering with. The development of targeted genetic weapons will revolutionize corporate security. The Lyrans were simply convenient test subjects." Vayana's patterns flashed with rage, but James spoke before she could. "That's all we needed. Transmission recorded and being broadcast on all emergency frequencies." He smiled grimly. "The Independent Worlds Alliance sends their regards." Chaos erupted across their command channels as the station's personnel realized their admission had been captured. James used the confusion to dock the Starweaver at an emergency airlock, the ship's damaged hull groaning in protest. "The colonial hackers have located the primary research labs," Vayana reported, already moving toward the airlock. "Level 42, Section C security systems are compromised, but they're sending armed response teams." James checked the charge on his plasma pistol. "Then we'd better move fast." He caught Vayana's arm as she passed. "Stay close to me. Whatever happens in there." She touched his face gently, her patterns shifting to that special color that seemed reserved just for him. "Together," she said simply. The next 20 minutes were a blur of running battles through the station's corridors. The colonial hackers had trapped many of the security teams behind sealed bulkheads, but enough remained to make every intersection a potential ambush point. Finally, they reached the main research lab. Inside, they found exactly what they'd been looking for, and more than they'd bargained for. "By the stars," Vayana whispered, her patterns pulsing with horror as she scanned the laboratory data. They weren't just developing a weapon. They were trying to find a way to harvest our bioluminescence. The plague was designed to make us desperate enough to surrender ourselves for treatment. James moved to a central console, inserting the data core they'd brought. How long to download the cure protocols? 2 minutes. She worked quickly, her patterns flickering between disgust and determination. They have it all here, the original strain, the cure, everything we need to prove what they've done. An explosion rocked the station. Colonial hackers report station security is regaining control of their systems, James warned. We need to move. The download completed just as the first security team breached the lab's outer doors. James and Vayana took cover behind research equipment as plasma bolts filled the air. The cure's encrypted. Vayana shouted over the weapon's fire. We need command-level access to release it. James spotted a familiar name on one of the nearby terminals. Cover me. He sprinted across the lab as Vayana laid down suppressing fire with a borrowed weapon. Reaching the terminal, his fingers flew across the keys. Your sister, what was her name? What? Vayana's patterns pulsed with confusion. The research director, it's the same one who visited your colony. Bet they used your sister's genetic data as an encryption key. What was her name? Understanding dawned in Vayana's eyes. Lysara. Of the third house, born under the twin moons. James input the name, adding the colonial significance markers. The terminal chimed, and the encryption fell away. Got it. Full access to everything. They fought their way back to the Star Weaver, the data core clutched safely in Vayana's grip. As they cleared the station's perimeter, a massive explosion lit up the viewport, the colonial hackers' parting gift, destroying the bioweapon research facilities. Transmitting cure protocols to the colony, Vayana announced, her patterns glowing with triumph and relief. The Alliance ships are responding, they'll be at the colony within days. James slumped in his pilot's seat, suddenly exhausted. Well, he said with a weak smile, I think that takes care of your payment for passage. Vayana turned to him, her expression serious. James. She moved closer, her patterns shifting to that special color again. I never actually offered myself as payment. Not really. He looked at her in surprise. What? I offered myself as collateral, she corrected softly. But what I found instead was something far more valuable. Her hand found his. A partner. Someone who would fight for what's right, no matter the cost. Someone who sees beyond the differences between us. James felt his heart race as he understood what she was saying. The colony will need help rebuilding, he said carefully. And the Star Weaver could use a permanent co-pilot. Someone who knows how to read the stars. Are you offering me a job, Captain Harrison? Her pattern sparkled with amusement and something deeper. I'm offering you a home, he replied softly. If you want it. Her answer was to lean forward and press her forehead to his, a traditional Lyran gesture of deepest trust and affection. Her patterns wrapped them both in a gentle, luminescent glow. As they set course for the colony, James realized that what had started as a desperate bargain had become something far more precious. In trying to save her people, Vayana had saved him too, from the loneliness of the void, from the cynicism of his years on the frontier. And as the Star Weaver limped home through the star-studded darkness, its systems damaged but its crew whole and hopeful, James knew that some trades brought rewards that no amount of credits could match.